Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here again today. Today, I'm really excited to talk with Preston Dennett again. This is part 2 of our conversation because Preston has so much to offer and there's so many things that we can talk about. It's hard to cover it in just an hour and a half. Preston is a aficionado in the paranormal world, the UFO world. Remind me, Preston, how many books you've written on this in this realm.
20 on UFOs and 8 on paranormal.
Wow. Thank you for your service to the planet. That's amazing. Definitely. So I put Preston's bio in the details below, and like I said, this is part 2 of our conversation. So we talk about some other topics, out-of-body experiences and extraterrestrials in part 1. So I will also put the link down in the details so that you can go watch that as well, because we have a really amazing, fascinating conversation in that video as well. Okay, so Preston, thank you for being here again.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so you wrote a book, or I've seen one of your presentations actually at Contact in the Desert about UFOs and extraterrestrials helping to heal people. I thought it'd be a good idea to start. You and I talked a little bit. We talked about what we might cover, because there's so much. And so I thought that would be a good way to get started, because I know I have my own extraterrestrial healing experiences and know some people that have had that as well. Do you mind sharing the information that you've gotten on that?
Yeah. Oh, this is probably one of my favorite aspects of the whole UFO field, because there's honestly a lot of fear surrounding this subject. A lot of people start out who are having encounters a little bit fear-based and having some real trauma with this. And I know when I came into this field in 1986, I was pretty much looking at this through the lens of fear. Greys abducting people, kidnapping them, doing horrific experiments on them. I mean, how could this be good for us? And it really took quite a bit of research and just objectively looking at the evidence before I really began to realize, the media is twisting this subject in a way that is inaccurate. It is not warranted. It's not true. There is a very strong healing component to UFO encounters. It's very consistent. It's across the board. I can tell you with absolute certainty that most major researchers have healing cases, people who are physically healed during a UFO encounter. Bud Hopkins, arguably one of the leading researchers, never wrote one line about this. And it always kind of made me curious. So one day I cornered him at a conference. This was in 1994. I'm like, Bud, what's up with these healing cases? Because I had just started researching them. This was before I had written any books. This was 1994. I was in this field for a good 10 years before I started, considering writing books. And I'm like, do you have any healing cases? And he says, yes, yeah, I've got several. And I'm very encouraged by them, because it shows that, there's a positive aspect to these encounters that doesn't get a lot of attention. And ETs are really interested in some of the most lovely aspects of being human. That's what he said. I'm like, oh, interesting. Because David Jacobs, who takes a pretty dim view on the whole UFO encounter experience, also has multiple healing cases. Not one or two, a lot. People healed of diphtheria, of pneumonia, many healing cases. So does John Mack, Barbara Lamb. Edith Fiore is the first person with a PhD to write about UFO experiences. And she says that half of the people, that she interviewed, reported healing encounters.
That's a lot.
Right?
Yeah.
So this ended up being my first book. I called it UFO Healings, and it presented 100 cases. That was 1996. The book went out of print after, some years. And I kept, every time I spoke on that subject, someone would come up out of the audience and say, oh, I was cured of deafness. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, look I've got laser scars behind my ears. One guy said I had an infected tattoo. They healed me. And just case after case after case. And eventually I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to write another book on this, because I have got triple the amount of cases. I've now documented 300 cases. I just put out another book, well, a year or two ago, called The Healing Power of UFOs, and that has 300 cases. 300. And I can tell you that pretty much, well, I can't say every illness, but the list is long. There are cases of very minor conditions being healed. Cuts, bruises, broken bones, burns, stomach aches, like 10 or 20 cases of back pain alone, colds and flus, serious conditions of all manners of diseases, liver disease, kidney stones, heart disease, jaundice, hepatitis, diabetes, cancer, of course, 30 some cases of cancer, lots of cases of tumors being removed. So that's just a brief introduction. I haven't even really gotten into any specific cases, but this is what we're dealing with. Healing people is absolutely, demonstrably one of the primary ET agendas.
Wow. I love that. That's that really touches my heart, definitely. Thank you, Preston. Do you feel if there's any reason why certain people are healed and maybe certain people aren't? Or do you have an intuition about that, or have you have information about that?
I do, and it took me a while to come up with an answer, because that was a question I'd get a lot, and I'm like, well, I don't know. It's kind of randomish. It's kind of my go-to answer, because as near as it is evenly divided between men and women, and it's people of all ages. There's a lady in England who was like 80, cured of jaundice. A guy in my latest book, Wondrous, he was in his late 70s, cured of prostate problems. I'm like, why are they healing an old man? A little girl in Brazil who lives out in a very rural area was cured of very bad vision. I'm like, why would they cure a little girl out living out in the jungle? This is just, I couldn't figure it out for the longest time, because it's every, I won't use the word race, ancestry. It's every ancestry, because we're all one race.
Right. The human race.
Yeah, there aren't different races. We're all just one. So it's people of all different ancestries, for sure. It's not blood type, it's not age, it's not religion, it's not sex, it's not political affiliations. I started asking that. I'm like, well, let's figure this out. And what I did find were 2 to 3 major patterns. And the biggest pattern was, if you are having this in your family, do you have a history of UFO encounters? Because we know this tracks bloodlines. So if you are having onboard experiences, the chances are your parents did, or your grandparents, or your aunts and uncles, or somewhere in your family line, this is going on. So we've tracked this in many cases, several generations. I think Bud Hopkins was the first to really cement this into our, the study of it with his book Intruders. But yeah, that's something we see all the time. If you're a contactee, your children are probably having encounters. And so what I found is that at least 50% of the cases of people being healed do have a history of encounters. They're part of the genetic project. They're part of the upgrading of the human race.
Right.
So I think that is a pattern. And that's kind of where I always left it, because I couldn't bring it much farther than that until one day I was interviewing this lady from Norway, and she did not have a history of encounters. She described how she woke up one evening and the room was filling with light, and in walks 3 grays. And she'd never, I mean, this was 1990 something, so she kind of knew what grays were. It was 94 or so. And they started flopping her around like a rag doll, she says, and it was very scary. She's screaming at them, "What are you doing? Who are you? What's going on?" They didn't answer any of her questions, flopped her onto her stomach, pressed an instrument on her back, and she says she felt some energy pulsing into her. And they stepped back, walked through the walls. She looks outside through the window. It's eerie blue light. She jumps up and goes to the window, and the light blinks off, and that was it. I'm like, okay. I had to go over the experience a few times, and so do you have any history of encounters? She's like, no, I don't. I'm like, are you sure? She says, well, I had one distant sighting with a crowd of people, but it was way the heck up there. I'm like, okay, that's probably not something that's personal to you. And then I asked her, well, what do you do for a living? She says, oh, I'm an artist. I'm a retired graphics artist. I had injured my back in an accident, and it was really causing problems at work. I said, oh, an artist. That's interesting, because I've interviewed a number of artists who were healed. And then she said, but I'm retired. My real passion is human rights and animal rights. And I'm work very hard in this. And I'm very, well known in my country. This is Norway, for doing this. So please don't use my name. I'm like, no, don't worry, I won't. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is like the 5th social worker I've interviewed who has been healed. And I started going through this happened to John Hunter Gray, very well-known social worker who got awards for his work. He was healed. And I remember Michael Carter, who I love. He's this really just a wonderful man on the East Coast who suffered from a blood clot in his leg. Swelled up to twice its size. He went to the doctor. The doctor was horrified. It's like, why didn't you come earlier? Don't you realize how serious this is? We need to start you on treatment right away. And gave him a whole cocktail of blood thinners and drugs to treat his leg, his blood clot. And he woke up one evening, and there was what people call a Nordic. I don't like that term. It's not accurate. I call them human-looking ETs, because some are dark-skinned, honestly. But he described your typical sort of blonde hair, blue-eyed, muscular figure, 6.5 feet tall, who stood at the foot of his bed, held up his hand, palm forward, and a blue light came out. This is interesting because a lot of, no, I won't say a lot, about 10% actually of the cases don't involve what I would call technology, but seem to be a more spiritual healing or a hands-on healing type event. Mm-hmm. And this is what Michael Carter described. And this light hit him, and he was a little bit dazed and disoriented, but super excited. Fell back asleep, woke up the next morning, couldn't wait to tell his wife, his family, like, you're not going to believe what happened. And sits up in bed and looks down at his leg, and his leg is normal size. The blood clot is apparently gone. And not only that, his veins were rerouted, his arteries. His leg looked different. And he tells his wife, everyone's super excited. He goes to the doctor because he's going weekly to check on his progress. And this was shortly after he had been diagnosed. And he goes to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh my God, what happened? And Michael, like most patients, did not say, well, an ET came.
Yeah.
Some do, by the way. Some have told their doctors flat out, oh yeah, ET.
Good.
But he didn't, which I understand. Mm-hmm. And he says, I don't know. I think, it's a miracle. The doctor's like, yeah, I can see that. How? this leaves a long trail of really baffled, sometimes upset doctors.
I imagine.
So Michael was healed, and he is a very prominent social worker. He's a Black man, African American ancestry, and was actually commended by President Clinton for his work against racism. He's a minister. He does hands-on healing. He's the kindest man. He's an author as well. So this is the pattern. And I started, okay, I'm going to go back through all the cases I've got. And that is absolutely a pattern. And what I found was a very high incidence of social workers, human rights activists, animal rights activists, doctors, a lot of teachers, inventors, police officers, artists, musicians, people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
There was one guy I interviewed, Don Anderson is his name, and he had been healed of a cold, chest cold. He had an ET appear in his room. He had this just chest cold that wouldn't go away. And this ET appears and hands him a vial of glowing pink liquid. And I'm like, wow, you're serious? He's like, yeah. He described this being as being very human looking, had kind of grayish hair, tied up in a bun, really kind of oriental looking eyes, Asian looking eyes, whitish skin, human looking, but not human, wearing a tight jumpsuit with a weird symbol, and hands him this weird vial. I'm like, what did the vial look like? Because I'm always interested in details. And he says, it was just like your little lab beaker, plastic or maybe glass, and a glowing pink liquid, which he says was viscous, thick, but kind of tasteless. And he drank it and handed the vial back. I'm like, too bad. I would have loved to see that vial. And the guy walks through the wall and disappears. And his chest cold goes away. And he hasn't been sick since. And I'm like, oh, what do you do for a living? Because now that's a go-to question. And he says, oh, I'm a bus driver. I'm like, oh, huh. Okay, well, that kind of fits the pattern, I guess. And we started talking about his job as a bus driver. He had all kinds of interesting, fun stories about weird people who come on the bus.
I bet, yeah.
But then he says, my real passion is this website I run. It's called Shabala, which means, I think, the ancient ones or something. And it's all about, providing spiritual information for people who want to become spiritually enlightened. Like, bingo, here we go.
So they're taking care of us, the people who their life plan is to be of service to others.
Yeah, there was another case of a couple I interviewed, and they're from Hawaii, and an elderly couple who were gone to Sedona for a vacation. And he was a postal worker. She was, I think, originally from Europe. I forget what she did for a living. I'm not sure if she even had a job, but at any rate, they were in Sedona, and this UFO started chasing them down the road. And they're like, oh my God, this is kind of scary. He had had some prior UFO experiences, so had she. She had been rescued from drowning as a little girl by ETs.
Wow.
Well, we can get into that later. They rescue people. But at any rate, there's UFOs chasing them through the mountain roads of Sedona, and then suddenly it's in front of their car. And they have no choice really but to follow it or stop the car. So they're following it. So it's kind of playing this little cat and mouse game with them. And then goes to the side of their car and lands in a field and disappears. And they go to their hotel and they're like, why is it so late? It's an hour and a half later than it should be.
Oh.
Red flag, missing time. They knew it.
Right.
And so eventually they sought out hypnotic regression, which is controversial. Some people say, false memory syndrome and this sort of thing, but I am convinced it does work in the right hands. I think it's a valid tool. And there's a number of reasons I believe this to be true, because it's been shown to be true in some studies. Some studies know it. People have gotten false memories, but in the right hands, I think it's a valid tool. And the fact is, memories people are recalling under hypnotic regression correspond, match exactly what people are consciously recalling. So that's just a bit of an aside, because people are like, you shouldn't promote hypnosis. I'm like, well, just wait a second here.
Yeah.
It's controversial, but it does work. Most of the cases I investigate are fully consciously recalled, but this one wasn't. So they go under hypnosis, and he couldn't really remember much, but she recalls going on board, and they were not abducted. She says, no, we were invited on board of our own free will. We walked up, they said, do you want to come on board? And we said, yes. They went on board. It was human-looking ETs, but they were bald and did have large dark eyes and pale skin, but otherwise were human-looking. And the ship was very sparsely furnished. There wasn't really a whole lot on there, a little console, some lights, gray walls, and they were examined. And she started questioning them, and they were very forthcoming. And, well, somewhat. She asked, where are you from? And they gave a typically evasive answer. We are from a place you don't know about yet. Mm-hmm. That's the sort of answer they'll give you. It's not important, or you wouldn't understand, the sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And she says, why did you contact us? And they said, we are helping those who are helping others, but we can't help too much because you need to figure out the answers for yourself. And that was really interesting, because in their community in Hawaii, they're slightly off grid. They help a lot of people. He goes around and helps people with their homes. She's an herbal healer, and they're very active in their community, helping people. So I'm like, wow, here we go again. This is the pattern.
Yeah.
And they're helping. This is a question I'm sometimes asked, like, why don't they just heal everybody? I'm like, are you kidding? Do you know what would happen if they did that? We'd had an overpopulation. If it would be much worse for us if we were handed that healing technology. The human race, or I'm going to point fingers here at our government and the military industrial complex, who I'm not entirely convinced have our best interests in mind in a number of cases. I'm not going to say everyone within government is bad, because I don't believe that for a second. But I think we know who we're talking about here, the people who are enacting this cover-up, the people who, the banking industry, the insurance industry, the Food and Drug Administration, the highest levels of the military industrial complex, the 1%ers, the oil industry. These guys are on my naughty list. Shame on you for poisoning our food supply, for all the things you know better. And I think that if they were given the healing technology, it would not be good for us. It would just give them an unending supply of soldiers. And there's already some evidence that we've got some real problems with this, because there are whistleblower accounts regarding the UFO crash retrieval phenomenon, where some of this healing technology has been lifted from these craft.
Right.
And it's being used by these people surreptitiously and for their benefit only.
Yeah. So, and being hidden from the human population.
Yes, which is unfortunate. We have all the tools to fix all our problems.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's being hidden. It's been hidden, I believe, and what my peeps, or what I get from my peeps, is it's been hidden from us for a long time. And what you were saying makes total sense with the extraterrestrials telling that couple that they can't interfere too much. And I believe that it's Star Trek is a documentary pretty much of the future. And so there's the prime directive, right, where they can't interfere with a society or a culture that is evolving. It has to be able to evolve. We have to be able to evolve on our own, because it wouldn't do us any good for them to give us all this technology that we're not ready for.
Yeah, any parent knows that. Anyone who's ever had to deal with a child knows that you can teach them, but you cannot do for them. That everyone has to spread their wings and fly. And this is why I think the ETs kind of look upon us as their children. All the Native American and indigenous cultures talk about how we are descended from them. We are them, they are us.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
it truly, the whole fear thing is so frustrating. I get it that if you wake up and you see a gray in your room, you're like, ah! Next thing you know, you're on board, and if you're undressed and they're poking at you and prodding, you're like, ah! And
Oh, that's traumatizing to us, to the human psyche. We're used to for our home to be our safe haven and our bedroom to be our safe space, and so it's definitely traumatizing. I can relate to that. I have to ask you one thing, and diverse here, Preston, then we'll get back. You always have some really cool drawings behind you. Can you share, do you mind sharing with those, where they come from?
Yeah, I've been just suddenly had the compulsion to start drawing.
So those are yours. Oh,
Yeah,
they're amazing.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these are a bunch of grays. These are all true life cases.
Nice.
So I've been drawing to sort of illustrate some of the cases I've been investigating. And this is from a gentleman from Louisiana who was taken on board, and he was being physically examined. He had a very strong fear reaction, jumped up and punched one of the grays in the head, and down it went. Like the third person I've interviewed who've attacked the grays. And there are a number of cases in the literature like this.
And what happens after that?
Well, a bunch of them came running into the room.
Yeah.
And that's what this illustration depicts.
Okay.
And they said, calm down, calm down. We're not here to, this is the first thing out of their mouths, by the way. When they come into your room, when they appear, they're like, do not be afraid. We mean you no harm. We are not here to hurt you. They say it over and over again. And I think it's demonstrably true, and certainly in most cases. I'm not going to say every case is benevolent, because it's not.
Yeah.
And often people have a very strong fear reaction. And when you're in a fear-based state of mind, it's very hard to observe objectively. It's very hard to come to any other conclusion like, this is bad. I don't like this. This is bad. When it isn't necessarily bad. Just talk to a nurse. Yeah. Nurses are routinely attacked by their patients. Like, what are you doing?
Well, yeah, and I'm thinking about how a child would feel at the doctor's or in a hospital, I guess, and all these nurses and doctors are around them, and they don't understand what's going on, or a baby or something doesn't understand what's going on. That would be extremely terrifying for them, I would imagine, if they don't understand. And it would be, and it's, because I remember panic mode with my experiences. It's shaking like a leaf, and I heard that we're not going. You remember, we're not going to hurt you. They tell me, you remember us, you know us. So it takes some coaxing, definitely. To, sometimes that doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think this is sort of the explanation. People say, this I did not agree to this. I'm like, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but yes, you did. We agree to all our experiences. This is what Earth School is. And the problem is we compartmentalize our consciousness. And this pops back to the whole out of body thing, which it becomes really clear if you start, opening up your mind to your full consciousness. And the problem is ETs come down and they talk to your superconscious, your subconscious, your id, your ego, your superego. And on some level, we absolutely agree to this. My next book is so cool. I'll give you a little scoop here.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm interviewing this lady by the name of Dolly. And she's this amazing woman from Florida who's had full conscious contact since age 14.
Wow.
She just got fed up. She'd been having contact her whole life, missing time, all the way up to age 14. She still is, she was having some fear issues, obviously. And so that's it. I'm not dealing with this anymore. Either I'm going to remember or I'm not going to be a part of this. And she started having full-on conscious contact from that day forward. And having interviewed, hundreds of people, I've gotten piecemeal of what happens to people when they're taken on board. Because there are memory issues with this. A lot of people do not remember, do not choose to remember, or their memory is suppressed in some way, but not hers. And she's absolutely got a continuous narrative. And she says, no, the Greys do not ever take anyone against their will. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. You cannot say that, because people are screaming, don't take me. And they're telling me, I did not choose this. She says, no, they did. They absolutely did. They just don't remember. And it all comes down to, people having to elevate their consciousness and really break down those walls into their whole self. That's a major gray agenda, major ET agenda, I should say, is they want people to spiritually evolve. And this is what will happen to people. I would say the majority of people I've interviewed start fear-based. They have a difficult childhood, and it's filled with trauma, PTSD, nightmares. They can't sleep unless there's lights on. They want that door locked. They have multiple locks on their doors. This is something I, come to realize. I'm like, tell me about your sleeping habits. Oh, I sleep under the bed. My wife thinks I'm crazy. I'm like, wow. Or I'm like, do you keep locks on the doors? I'm like, well, yeah, I have like 4 locks on my doors. How did you know? I'm like, just asking. Because some people don't know that they're contactees. And I start asking these questions. And I'm like, do you have a security system? Oh, yeah, I do. And have you had, sleep paralysis, nightmares, PTSD, and by and large, yeah, this can start out very scary. And I'm going to say 70 to 80% of the people who are what I would call full-on contactees evolve and move past the fear at some point. Debbie Jordan Cobble was Bud Hopkins' star client in the book Intruders. It's a scary book. If you read it, it's darn scary.
I haven't read it. For some reason, I wasn't drawn to his books. Now I know why. Thank you for confirming that.
Yeah.
I was drawn more to Dolores Cannon and that kind of stuff rather than in your books. But as far as Bud Hopkins, for some reason, I wasn't. Now I know why.
Yeah. I actually like his books, because if you are able to read it without jumping, that point of view, he's very objective. I will absolutely kudos to Bud, because he didn't portray. I mean, there's a little bit of it. Yeah, it is a little scary the way it's portrayed, but he gives the facts. He's not like, because some researchers, well, I did talk to a few people who were investigated by Bud Hopkins and were disappointed that he did not include the spiritual information of their cases. And I know this is true from other researchers. And I think there's a sort of an impulse to sort of exclude some information that might look a little woo-woo or spiritual or be hard to believe. That's from early researchers particularly.
Okay.
Because it's all nuts and bolts. We need to prove this is real. And if we start talking about ghosts and shadow people and dreams that come true and healing, people are going to be turned off and think this person is nuts.
So it took a while. It takes a while for us to wake up to that, but that's all part of the deal.
Yeah, but absolutely, people come around at some point. There was one lady I interviewed. Her case is so interesting. Pat Brown, this beautiful African-American woman who had no history of encounters that she knew of. She did actually, but it was very much suppressed. And she had a friend who wanted to take her to Sedona and see the walk-ins who channel extraterrestrials. And Pat's like, no, I don't want to. I've got no interest in that kind of thing. She was a telephone operator, very analytical. And finally she relented. I'm like, fine, let's go. And she's talking to this channeler, channels ETs. And she's looking at him like, if you really channel ETs, I want to go on board your craft. And he's like, oh, okay. I will see if I can arrange it. She ended up having a visitation by light beings in her hotel room in Sedona. Goes home. She has a condo in, I think it was like Pacoima, pretty densely populated area. It's a condominium complex. And in walked the Greys, and she was horrified. And this started a months-long contact with these Greys coming in and scaring the daylights out of her. And she was just at the end of her rope. She was not a happy camper. And finally, she's like just exhausted and just so tired of being afraid. She says, I am sick of this. If I am truly going on craft, I want to go right now and figure out what's going on. And boom, they took her. And she had a fully conscious encounter. It was very spiritual. And she saw this human-looking figure just glowing with light. And he said, let me take you to your quarters. And they took her to her room.
Wow.
I'm like, wow, because this is what Dolly describes. She has a room she goes to. And I've heard this from other contactees. But often it's very piecemeal. I'm like, oh, this is, Dolly says this, and that's what Pat said. That's what this other guy said. I'm like, wow, they do have quarters. There are bathrooms, there are beds, there's food. There's all this stuff that these are just people. They are people like us. And they ended up, in Pat's case, giving her all this information about spirituality. They said, here's your feminine side. Here's your masculine side. You need to merge them. Here's how you do astral travel. See this? They took her out of body and showed this band of black writhing mass around our planet, Earth.
Wow. Yeah.
And she's like, oh, what's that? It's ugly. And they said, that is the fear and negativity that you guys are putting out. It's choking your planet.
Yeah.
And so that was the turnaround point for her.
And when was that? How long ago was that?
Oh, that was years ago. Yeah.
Oh, I hope that's changed. Well, I don't know. We're kind of in a fear-based mode. A lot of humanity is now. But yeah, hopefully a lot of that has changed.
I think it is. I think we're having a great awakening.
I agree.
Yeah. Because there is a lot of fear and there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on now. But now that everyone's like, there's the Great American Walkout. You've heard about this? People leaving their jobs in large numbers.
I did. I heard about that. Yeah. Yay.
Yours truly did it as well.
For you.
I was a bookkeeper for 35 years, and it just wasn't my passion.
That's what I did for 30 something years. Wow, that's funny. Yeah,
now people are recognizing the importance of family.
Definitely.
People are recognizing, women's rights. People are recognizing the racial divides. People are recognizing the unequal distribution of wealth, the incredible greed and corruption. So people are waking up, and I am super excited about it. And this is what the ETs have been trying so hard to get us to do and I think really that is what we need to do. It's elevate our consciousness to where we can be telepathically connected to each other, because we are.
We are, yes.
We are speaking to each other all the time. Telepathically, we are 100% connected.
Yeah.
And once we can bring that into our conscious awareness, there will be no greed or corruption or lies, because you can't lie to someone who can read your mind. And that's what I love about contactees. They're the nicest people. They're, as a general rule, super psychic. They can look at you and just read your mind. It's funny. I was interviewing I'd met this one lady at a Burbank MUFON meeting. And I'm looking at her and I just knew she was psychic because she's looking at me and I'm like, ooh. I feel like she's reading my mind. And I'm like, have you had UFO experience? She's like, oh yeah. She ended up being in one of my books. She's in my
Nice.
latest book, actually,
Nice.
Wondrous.
Very
Amazing
cool.
experiences. Yeah, I love the contactees. They're such amazing people.
Yeah, and I think also that out of body experiences and things like that, and having these awarenesses as we wake up, help us find our psychic abilities and our intuitive abilities and our telepathic abilities. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, yeah, and I think this kind of can explain some of the fear and trauma people have, because we
Yeah.
live, we're how can I put it? We're dumbed down, we're
Yeah.
drugged, we're poisoned, we're fear-based, we're trained to fear. And people are living their lives in denial of a lot of things and fighting to survive. And so the ETs are like giving them experiences, and we're not picking up on it. We're not picking up. And so finally, like, that's it. We're just going to have to give them a little bit of a push. And we'll do that. And people will be given an experience that is absolutely undeniable. They will wake up and see marks on their body, or they will be put in the wrong place, dropped outside.
Yeah, that happened to me a lot as a kid.
or put, facing the wrong way in bed, or given the wrong clothes to wear, or what I would call a calling card, something that says, okay, they're gonna recognize something's going on now. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a real wake-up call.
Yeah.
And I think they're doing it intentionally.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that's always true when people are returned with the wrong clothes.
They probably, because my memories of as a kid is when I was on the ships, often I was with other kids, and if they do examinations on us or whatever they're doing, because I remember one experience while I was with a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, I believe, and they were healing us from something that was going around, some kind of illness. I believe it was chicken pox or something, and they were healing a bunch of us. They took us on the ship together.
Yeah.
And what's so funny is I ran into and I never heard that from anyone, but I ran into a gentleman recently who was telling that story, that he woke up in the middle of the night and he's walking down the road, and as a kid, and there's a bunch of kids walking down the road with him, like in a trance state. And they went on the ship and they were doing like a checkup on all of them to see how the kids were doing. Like, whoa.
It's a major ET agenda. That's why people are being physically examined.
Yeah.
Galde talks about this. I'm doing a whole chapter on this because she's like, oh yeah, people are taken and they're healed. She's got case after case after case. People healed of, you name it. Edith Fiore talked about this. One of her clients, Linda and Sherry, they were sisters from Northern California, saw lots of people being healed of bursitis and intestinal worms and fever and all kinds of things. I came to look at UFOs, in the beginning. I'm like, oh, these are alien torture chambers. That was kind of my thought. And I'm like, And then after I had interviewed this lady, Wendy, who was healed of a cyst. This was my first healing case. She had a cyst in her fallopian tubes, and ETs came and healed it. Doctors were like, what happened? Your tumor is gone. This makes no sense. You've had surgery. We know you had surgery. And she denied it. I'm like, why didn't you just tell them? She said, are you kidding? The men in the white coats would have come, which has happened. I interviewed a lady who was healed, and she went public, and her family had her institutionalized, took her baby away.
Oh.
It's a sad story.
Oh, that's awful.
So I can see why people don't say it. But after interviewing Wendy, I'm like, this would make a great article, because I knew of a case in Texas where a police officer was healed of a flesh wound. I knew a case from Jacques Vallée in France, where a gentleman was cured of an axe wound on his foot and partial paralysis from injuries received in the Algerian War years earlier. He's a piano player, a musician, and a doctor. And I knew a Peruvian customs official. Well, I didn't know him. I knew of the case, who was struck by a beam of light and cured of rheumatism and nearsightedness. I thought this would make a great article. And so I'm like, I've got Wendy's case, I'll bring a few more together. Let's dig into the literature and see what I can come up with. I found 30 cases in a day. I'm like, ooh, I'll never be able to
That's a
fit this.
lot of cases.
And so I'm like, let's dig even deeper. And so I spent a year researching, and I found 100 cases, and that ended up being my first book. And that's when I realized, oh my God, they are not trying to hurt people, are they? I'm like, let's see if they are. Let me see if I can find any cases where they are deliberately hurting people. Couldn't
You didn't
find
find any, really?
Nope. I
Wow.
found cases where people did suffer medically. Yes, there are people who have come back and they were perhaps dropped off outside during a snowstorm and got frostbite. I'm like, that's not very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Or, eye damage from looking at a UFO, or getting too close to a UFO and being burned. And a few cases of people, being struck by a beam of light and being, radiation type sickness.
I've heard about that. Yeah.
But I'm looking at them, I'm like, I wonder if these are accidental or not. Because the healing cases all seem very much intentional. I'm like, okay, well, let's look at what's happening when people are being taken on board. And I couldn't find any cases where ETs are breaking people's arms or torturing them or hurting them deliberately or trying to scare them.
Yeah.
I could basically found 0 cases of what I would call outright sadism, which, if someone's kidnapped on Earth, you know what's going to happen to them. It's not good.
Yeah.
And often they're not returned.
Yeah.
They, lose their lives. It's humanity is very aggressive and out of control in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of problems we have with our spiritual growth, and you just don't see that. I would say the worst thing I hear, generally speaking, is the physical examination. And there are some negative cases. Absolutely. I heard of one case which just harrowing. One lady said that basically she was given a pain threshold test.
Ooh.
Which sounds horrible. Is horrible. I mean, oh
I'd be
my
like, okay,
God.
one, I'm done.
And yeah, I mean, some people feel absolutely violated. And I am not going to try to backpedal their case or justify it or, rationalize it in any way. A person's experience is a person's experience. And they are absolutely entitled to interpret it any way they want. But I will say, I've talked to people who've described essentially the same exact experience in its details. And one will come away like, I hated it. I don't want them ever to come again. They're evil. They're demonic. And another will say, oh my gosh, I wasn't afraid at all. They were angelic. I love them.
Nice.
And
Okay.
most are sort of in between. And it is a little bit of a mixed bag because it can start out scary. But like in my book, Onboard Encounters, I have 15 cases. I'm like, let's analyze this. One guy feels they're demonic. 100%. He's very religious. So I think that's part of it. People.
Programming, some kind of programming that we all deal with.
Yeah, I mean, religion is
Perceptions.
a factor of our culture, and we all have our belief system.
Right.
And we interpret everything we experience through our belief system.
Right.
And if you believe that, supernatural beings are by nature demonic, I think that's going to be your go-to.
Yeah.
And another guy in the book was also religious, but he thought they were angels. He had and everyone else, like, they're ETs. And one guy was healed. I mentioned him. Dudley was his name. He was healed of prostate problems. He's a alternative homeopathic healer. And so I think there's a wide interpretation of events, and ET behavior falls under the same umbrella as human behavior, but it's skewed far more towards the positive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is.
I'm happy to hear that. I mean, we hear all kinds of stories of the negative agenda too, but I'm happy to hear that you have not come across much of that at all. It makes me feel better. So have you, Preston, have you had any reports of animals on being healed or on ships with people or anything like that?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
cool.
I've done some research into this because ETs are interested in all things human, all things Earth.
Mhm.
And so there are case after case where they're taking soil samples, picking flowers. One lady in Brazil had her Swiss cheese plant, a split leaf philodendron, stripped of leaves by gray type beings who kept coming back for it and stripped it of leaves. She's like banging on the window, "Hey, my plant, what are you doing?" And they take animals too. There's cases where they're hovering over zoos.
Mm.
Lots of cases where they're stealing rabbits from farms and pigs and cows. So they're taking animals, and people who are taken on board do see what is basically an arboretum. One
Mhm.
lady from John Mack, she was taken on board and saw a pine forest.
Mm.
Betty Andreasen described that,
Mhm.
a pond with fish. And a number of people, RD6 Killer Clark has a number of cases where people are taken on board and shown fruit trees and alien zoos as well. Dolly talks about this. Boy,
Alien zoos meaning alien type of animals? Or
yes,
just, okay,
yep, and earth animals.
okay.
And I have a dozen cases or so of animals being healed, and it's so cool.
Yes.
One guy from England, I believe it was, saw a light in his horse barn. His horse had a hoof disease. And he goes running in there, and there's this alien, a human-looking alien, holding this weird device, which is kind of branched out. It's got two globes on either side, and he's running it up and down the horse's legs. And the guy runs up to him, and the guy says, "Step back. I'm healing your horse." I don't know why they would do that. It's very interesting to me. But another guy had his dog healed of arthritis. Got a number.
Wow.
One lady, she described how her dog was healed of valley fever, a fungal infection, and she was really reliant on her dog. She loved her dog, and so I think that's why, because she was a contactee. Reynero Hernandez is fairly prominent in this field. He wrote, or edited rather, the book Beyond UFOs, which is really taking a scientific look at the subject. And he takes a very benevolent viewpoint towards ETs. And he was a skeptic, a lawyer. And he had an experience where ETs came into his living room and healed his Jack Russell Terrier, Nina, who was quite aged and suffering from, heart problems and arthritis and a number of conditions, and healed the dog. Who lived for another year or so.
That's
and was
awesome.
actually, he was going to take her to the vet to put her down the next day because she had had a stroke or something. And that started him on the pathway of becoming a very prominent researcher.
Oh, so that had to happen.
And Dolly, she describes, she was a zookeeper for a while. Oh my gosh, the contactees have such a connection to animals. It's amazing, the animal stories that come from contactees. I've got a few of myself too, where a deer walked right up to me and pawed me and wanted my cookie. Or I had a red-tailed hawk land right next to me.
Oh, wow.
At a time of a spiritual crisis. I'd just been betrayed by someone who, I won't get too into it, but basically lied to me. And this red-tailed hawk just lands right next to me. I'm like, wow, it lifted my, negative feelings right off. And
that's amazing.
Dolly's amazing. She has had the kinds of animal experiences that are just off the charts. And she had this gibbon named Sarah who was suffering from leukemia. And she asked her ET friends to heal Sarah. And they did. They healed her. And Sarah is, as far as I know, still alive and well in a zoo on the East Coast.
Oh, I love hearing that.
Yes, they do heal animals.
Okay, I had not heard that. Nobody writes about that, really, that I've noticed. I'm not saying I read a bunch of books on it, but
yeah, I think part of the reason is they don't toot their own horn. They don't need to say, "I healed you." Look how great I am. We healed you. Most of these healings are done I think without even a person's knowledge, they come down and will
Mhm.
just heal you or the pet or plants. They heal plants.
Mm.
There's a case where a number of cases. One that comes to mind was where a UFO, this lady, this makes me laugh, over a lady's garden, and shined down this beam of light, and she goes out the next morning and her plants are like twice the size. And this is like early spring, and her plants are twice the size of everyone else on either side of the
Oh,
yard.
funny.
And her neighbors are like, how come your plants are so big? And she's like, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's my fertilizer. She knew, but she wasn't about to say.
Oh, so she was a contactee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they
That's
heal plants as well. I think this is one of the ways they do heal, is they can accelerate growth. So when someone has like a cut or a wound,
mhm.
what they're doing is they're shining this beam of light, which is basically enhancing the body's own natural processes.
Okay. That
So
makes
they're
sense.
so because we heal naturally, but if they
Right.
can actually, because they can control time to a certain extent.
Mhm.
And this is what some of the studies of plant growth have shown, is accelerated plant growth. So I think that's how they're healing people, is they're
I like
accelerating the tissues.
that makes sense. I like what you said about the the extraterrestrial with it was like a wand, right? That was healing the horse.
Yeah.
That's what they used on me. I have memory of them when I was a child, of them using this wand on my body to heal my body when I had trauma. And I just remember the smell of it. It was like, it reminded me of lavender, and maybe that was a screen memory, I don't know. But I remember that it was purple and it reminded me of a lavender smell. But I haven't heard anyone else talk about extraterrestrials using a wand. I love hearing that.
Yeah, it's actually not uncommon. I hear it
Oh,
fairly often. A
oh,
case that
okay.
comes to mind is from my latest book, Wondrous. Oh gosh, I forget the pseudonym I used for the lady. She does not want her real name used. She's from Ontario, Canada, and had the Greys walk in to her room, and she's like, "Oh, Greys," and the paralysis lifted. She was initially unable to move, but she had no fear, and so her paralysis was removed. And they said, "We need to measure you. Put out your arm." And they held up this wand, and they measured her. She's not sure what, her bioelectric field or something. And they ended up healing her back pain. And she says that after her encounter, she felt she had the ability to heal. And she did hands-on healing with people and would heal
Mm,
them of back pain. And they gave her warnings. This is another thing. If they talk to you, it's like, why are you messing around with nuclear power? Don't you realize how dangerous this is? These events are probably going to happen to your planet, and they will show widespread environmental destruction and collapse.
yeah,
They're very concerned about how we're treating our planet.
yeah.
Very concerned. It's the number one message. And that's what they showed her. So these are dire warnings for all humanity. We must find a way to stop our companies from polluting our water and our air. We must find a way to stop our governments from doing, mutual assured destruction with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Oh man, that is their number one message.
Yeah, and I believe that's probably why the contacts maybe really started ramping up in the 50s, is because of what we, dropping what we, the bomb and everything like that back then.
Yep.
And they
It's funny.
we got their attention.
The 50s was the contactee era.
Yeah.
And George Adamski, Howard Menger, Truman
Yes.
Beckwith,
Hmm.
all these guys, like, ETs are our friends. They're human looking. They're beautiful. And I was invited on board and given a tour of the solar system. And people are like, liars, liar, liar, liar. And now a lot of researchers are looking back on them like, maybe perhaps
Hmm.
George Adamski was telling the truth, at least in part. And a lot of researchers are like, And I agree, because I think the contactee era never ended. It was pushed
Right.
underground by an influx of accounts from Greys who gave the same message. It was the same message as given by the praying mantis. And they're all the same message. I don't care what type of ET. And as far as healings, it's mostly Greys doing it, just so you
Mhm.
know, which
Well,
shocked me. I thought it was
it,
going to be humans.
it was interesting that you mentioned, and I've heard this before too, is people have three grays that are with them, because I have full memory of three grays that would come to get me and heal me and take me on board the ship. I call them my caretakers, but there was three of them, always three of them.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And when someone
Mhm.
sees a UFO, by the way, it's usually there is another one in the sky, slightly higher up.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
started because someone told me that, and I'm like, I'm not so sure that's true. I started going through my files. I'm like, oh, these patterns slip by you. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, that is true. Not in every case, but in most cases. And I think in cases where it isn't true, it probably was not perceived.
Yeah.
But yeah, they come when someone sees a gray. There's usually a couple more along there.
Right.
It's sort of their little team that comes
Right.
down. There's a backup.
Right. So you mentioned that the Greys are the ones who are actually mostly doing the healing, and then you mentioned quickly praying mantids. Now I've seen mantids as well. I felt like they were kind of the ones that were like the doctor or the one who was telling maybe the Greys what to do. Well, I've seen different levels of Greys. Some that are
Yep.
very high level telepathic and have um, in robes and things like that. And then I've seen the ones that take me to the ships and that are part of me, part of my soul caretaking.
Yeah, there's different types for sure. There's short little ones, 3 to 4 feet tall, whom now this is, I'm not entirely sure about this, but this is certainly what Dolly says, and what a number of people have come to, believe or experience. The short little ones are what we would call androids, biological androids,
Okay.
perhaps not quite the living beings that we would attribute to a taller gray,
Mhm.
because they're not emotional in a lot of cases, and they're very lockstep and synchronized and got a job to do. And so that could be what's going on here in some of these cases where people are like, these guys aren't emotional. I'm like, well, maybe some, because the taller grays, the 4 to 5 to 6
Yeah.
foot, are absolutely emotional. And no, they don't like smile and wink, and because we're very facially
Yeah.
oriented. That's how we read emotions, and we are good at it. That is, people can tell the difference between faces to a remarkable degree. We're genetically coded towards that, and grays don't have a whole lot of facial expressions. And
I call it deadpan when I see them. I said they have this deadpan look on their face.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they smile with their eyes. That's what people will describe over and over again. And their emotions are deep and strong. And I've had many people tell me that they've had waves of love
Yes.
poured at them from the grays, which are the kind of love you feel with, holding your child for the first time, getting married, and that kind of love that people have after they survived an experience, kind of bonding love that is
Right.
transcendent. So that absolutely is, I think the grays are absolutely emotional.
Yeah.
And when someone's in a fear-based state of mind, they don't read it. They cannot read it, and it's very hard for the grays to get through to people. And what they will do is, if you're screaming your butt off, is they will, because you're going to jump up and snap one of their necks. Some of these guys are pretty frail physically. They paralyze you for their own safety, and will suppress your memories for your own safety, because you are having a panic reaction. And according to Dolly, and according to the awake contactees, it's not the ETs who are suppressing memories. It's people themselves who make that choice. They are basically deciding they don't want to remember this.
It's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, it's almost an hour and a half.
Oh, really?
All right, we're gonna have to do this again. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah, we didn't get into the schoolyard cases. I
We
love those.
We
Oh.
did get in the schoolyard. Would you honor me and have another conversation with me?
Of course.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I could talk about this probably for weeks nonstop.
Good. Thank you so much. And I'm definitely going to get your latest book and go to probably order a few of them. I do have one. Yes. So, but you have so many. Gosh, I'm gonna have to get through them. Well, I hate to break, but we have lives we have to get to, right?
Yeah.
So any closing words of wisdom or anything you can share that might help people who have experiences and maybe don't know how to process them or something like that?
Yeah. My words of wisdom or from the ETs would be to meditate. Do your best to elevate your consciousness. If you are having trouble with your experiences, step back, take a few deep breaths, and look at what's actually happening to you. Have you actually been hurt? Really sort of take a little bit of a break here, because people who want to end their experiences can. If you do not want to be a part of this project, all it takes is to put that forth and, and I do not want it. And they will step back and won't contact you for years at a time, and often come back at some point and hoping that, you're coming around. But yeah, meditate, try to elevate your consciousness, garden. We need to become self-sufficient. We need to stop depending upon our governments to take care of us.
Yeah.
I think open official contact is around the corner. I think that disclosure will happen, probably not voluntarily by our government, but maybe through CE5 work, that sort of thing, or the ETs themselves, or another government, probably not the US, but at some point, the world is going to change. And I think we just need to be positive. Leave fear behind, understand the universe is a safe place. We're immortal beings. We are unlimited in our ability. It's important to just have fun, be positive, recognize we are all one, and that the ETs are not here to hurt us. They're here to teach us, inform us, help us, and elevate us and heal us. So that's what I would like to leave people with.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's beautiful. All right. So thank you, Preston, once again for being here with me and chatting and sharing your amazing research and what you've learned on your journey so far, right? And thank you, everyone, once again for being here. And please subscribe, share, like, and comment below. And if you have any questions or anything like that, or just comment, it's would love to hear your thoughts and anything like that. And we'll see you next time.